You never forget the sound of steel meeting flesh. It's not the clean clang you hear in the movies. It's wet. It's wrong. And when you hear it for the first time, not on a screen, but right beside you, it changes something in you. This story isn't about chivalry or glory. It's about the mud, the blood, the fear, and the terrifying silence that followed. It's for the ones who've ever wondered if they would have had what it took to stand in that field, with nothing but sweat in their eyes and someone else's breath on their neck. Most tales begin with the horn blowing, but what they don't tell you is, if you were an average soldier, you wouldn't have heard it. The horn guy? He's probably tucked behind a tree, far from the carnage. And the rest of us? We shuffled forward like sheep through mud thick as dough, the stench of fear and garlic leaking from our mouths because, well, medieval hygiene wasn't exactly a thing. No slow-motion charges, no noble war cries, just a sea of nervous men yelling into the void to keep from losing their minds. The moment battle began, it wasn't the enemy that got you first. It was your own feet. Nearly half the line stumbled, in the opening seconds, slipping on hidden roots or crashing into the man in front. There's something comical and heartbreaking about seeing grown men in armor cry out like boys because their knees gave out. And yet, that's how it started. Not with valor, but with sprained ankles. Everyone screamed, but no one heard anything coherent. Not commands, not strategy, just pure, primal panic. Later studies suggest that up to 70% of men in battle made sounds they didn't even realize. Your body takes over. You're not thinking, you're reacting. Crying for your mother isn't cowardice, it's instinct. The first real blow doesn't always come from a sword. It might be a shoulder charge that rings your helmet like a church bell. Your ears ring, your vision narrows, and suddenly, your entire world shrinks to the 2 feet in front of you. You lock eyes with a man who's just as terrified as you are, and in that moment you both understand. This isn't glory. This is survival. Blood hits the ground early, not just from wounds, from vomiting, from panic, from men so overheated in their padded armor they collapse like wilted leaves. That armor? It wasn't a suit of power, it was a medieval oven. After 10 minutes, you'd be praying for a breeze or a blade, whichever came first. Now imagine this. You're stuck in a scrum, so tight you can't swing your sword. There's no room for flourishes, no duels, just jabs. Desperate, awkward pokes like you're trying to push through a crowded market. Forget fencing, it's rugby with knives. And the guy who brought 5 friends? He wins. Somewhere in this chaos, a sword hits a skull. Not with the clean slice of legend, but with a sickening crack. The weapon isn't slicing, it's crushing. Helmets help until they turn into ovens or blinders. Visibility becomes a slit. The sun bakes your face inside a tin can while you try not to suffocate from heat or get trampled from behind. Falling is death. You have 2 seconds to get up before 100 boots or blades find you. Battlefield excavations have shown bodies face down, barely covered in mud. They weren't slain by a blade, they drowned in filth, abandoned and forgotten. And here's the irony. Knights, those supposed paragons of valor, weren't above half-sorting their swords, gripping the blade itself to swing the hilt like a hammer. It's called the murder stroke, not poetic, just honest. That's what war was. A series of murder strokes, survival swings, and crushing chaos. Real-life example? Picture the Battle of Towton in 1461, England's bloodiest day. Men fought for 10 hours in a snowstorm, blinded by sleet, deafened by steel. When the bodies were counted, they didn't count the frozen ones pulled out days later. Some survivors had frost-bitten toes, others had bloodied hands that would never heal right. One man wrote years later that he still felt the cold in his bones on warm days. Trauma doesn't care about the weather. By the end of part 1, truth becomes clear. Medieval battle wasn't about skill or bravery. It was about staying upright, breathing, hoping your feet didn't slip, and above all, praying the man beside you didn't decide to run, because if he did, so would everyone else. And when the dust did settle, no cheers, no trumpets, just silence, the kind that seeps into your soul. You want to know what victory sounded like? Not fanfare, not clapping, it was the absence of screaming. A moment where your ears stopped ringing and you realized, somehow, you were still breathing. That was the prize. You were alive. That's all. Not richer, not stronger, just not dead. And in that world, that counted as winning. It's funny. We paint medieval warriors as men who stood tall, chests out, swords gleaming in the sun. But the truth is, most swords weren't polished steel. They were beat-up iron, dented and dulled, from overuse. Some had been repaired so many times they bent at odd angles. One good swing and you were holding a very expensive club. That's why the real killers didn't rely on blades. They used maces. Blunt, heavy, simple. Just a hunk of metal meant to crush whatever got in the way. Armor? Mace didn't care. It'd cave it in, break the ribs underneath, turn flesh into jelly. And here's the twisted part. Some knights believed maces were more holy because they didn't draw blood. They just broke you from the inside. A righteous loophole. Axes were no better. You didn't need training to use one, just rage and a good swing. Problem was, if your axe got stuck in a rib or helmet, you were done. That second of tugging it free, that's when your skull cracked. They found battlefields, littered with broken axes still embedded in shields or bone. Imagine that. Your final act being a botched pull. Spears were smarter, cheaper, more effective. A sharp stick 6 feet long kept your enemy far enough to stab before he got close. Problem was, in close quarters, they became a hazard. You'd poke your own man before you hurt the enemy. It was common. Friendly fire by spear. Improvised weapons were everywhere. Pitchforks, flails, modified shovels. Farmers turned soldiers used what they had. And it worked. A sharpened shovel didn't look glorious, but it opened bellies just the same. And it said something awful about war. That desperation often worked better than strategy. And when it came to weapons, quality was a lottery. If you were rich, your sword was art. If not, your blade wobbled, rusted, and might snap mid-swing. Many did. A weapon that failed you was the final betrayal. 1 second, you're a fighter. Next, you're holding a stick, praying. But even if your weapon held, your body didn't. The human body wasn't made for this. You bled out in minutes, lost 2 pints, you'd start to fade. 4, you'd be gone, and most men didn't even realize they were dying. Blood mixed with sweat and shock numbed the pain. Some just collapsed. Quiet. No scream. No farewell. The worst were blunt injuries. No open wound, just shattered organs. A man would take a hit, keep going, then suddenly fall. Internal bleeding. Brain swelling. A priest would say he died brave. A doctor would say his skull cracked like glass. There were no medics, just fellow soldiers doing what they could. A belt for a tourniquet. A hot blade to cauterize. If you were lucky, someone tried. If not, you were left in the mud, whispering. Prayers to a God that seemed deaf to screams. And the wounds that did get treated? Infections claimed most. No antibiotics. No sterilization. Just dirty hands and rusted tools. One monastery noted, 3 recover for every 10 who perish. Medicine was a gamble and death had the better odds. Even survival carried scars. Limbs lost, eyes gone, minds shattered, nightmares that never faded. The battlefield didn't just take bodies, it broke souls. By the 3rd hour of fighting, something strange would happen to your mind. It would begin to unravel. The constant spinning to face new threats, the shrieks of dying men, the splatter of blood on your face. Eventually it blurred into white noise. And in that noise people lost themselves, not metaphorically, literally. You'd ask yourself, where am I? Not in a dreamy way, but in a terrifying, disoriented panic. With no clear landmarks, smoke, screaming, dust. All orientation vanished. Studies of medieval accounts show that nearly 60% of fighters lost all sense of direction within minutes. Some soldiers even ended up retreating in the wrong direction, straight into enemy lines. That chaos only worsened with the problem of recognition. Was the man coming at you an enemy, or your cousin? Colors and banners helped at the start, but they quickly disappeared under layers of mud and blood. Helmets hid faces, Coats of arms were torn. Panic made men strike first and ask questions never. One battle report from 1461 noted that nearly 10% of the casualties were from friendly fire. It didn't matter how much training you had, because when fear took hold, instincts rewired your brain. Everything became movement, not identity, not allegiance. If it moved toward you, you struck it. A soldier wasn't a man anymore, he was a shape with a weapon, a threat. This is where the stories fall apart. Tales of honor, of choosing the right moment to parry or deliver a noble blow. No. The body fought on its own. Your conscious mind, the one that knew ethics, friendship, even fear, that part got pushed out. Modern psychologists call this dissociation. Fighters often described watching themselves from above. One man wrote in his journal, "I saw my hands kill, but they did not belong to me." Time warped in that state. Some minutes felt like hours. Others vanished in the blink of an eye. Men couldn't recall how many they had fought or even where they had been. One knight confessed under confession that he remembered killing someone, but not whether the man had been armed. That was the price of survival. Your soul got foggy. And then came the moment most never talk about. The choice to run. Movies call it cowardice. History calls it retreat. But those who survived knew. It was sanity clawing its way back. Most medieval battles didn't end with a clear winner. They ended when one side broke, not tactically, emotionally. Once the first man ran, 5 more followed, then a dozen, then 100. Panic was more contagious than plague. You'd see a comrade drop his weapon and flee, and suddenly you'd wonder why you were still standing there, waiting to die. And those who fled, they didn't escape untouched. Heavy armor turned even short runs into death sentences. Breathing became agony, legs burned. Many were cut down from behind. Others tripped and were butchered as they crawled. A few survived by hiding, under wagons, behind corpses, even inside the bellies of dead horses. Yes, that's real. A French soldier at Agincourt survived by burrowing inside a carcass and staying still for hours. There were no heroes among the foot soldiers, just men desperate to live. They played dead. They begged. Some even lay among the wounded, hoping to be mistaken for one of them. But the truly lucky ones were the runners who made it to the woods, out of sight, where they could vomit from stress and sob without shame. And when the last cry died away, the real horror began. The silence. When the battlefield went quiet, it didn't mean peace. It meant aftermath. It meant looking around and realizing the person you'd leaned on for years, your drinking companion, the man who helped fix your fence, he was now part of the mud. Some tried to close their eyes to find silence in their heads as well. But the silence only made the memories louder. Survivors didn't celebrate. They checked themselves. Am I bleeding? Are my limbs still here? Can I still walk? Some poked at their armor, looking for wetness, uncertain if the blood was theirs. Others didn't feel pain until hours later. Adrenaline has a cruel way of hiding damage. You'd think you were whole until your hand stopped working, or you vomited blood. The ground was littered with bodies, not laid out in neat rows like in art, but strewn about like broken dolls. Piled, twisted, stripped of anything useful. Soldiers scavenged what they could. Good boots, better swords, anything worth a few coins. In death, there was no dignity, only practicality. A good belt was a good belt. Even if you had to pull it off a friend, you'd see the strangest things. A man rocking back and forth, muttering prayers. Another laughing uncontrollably, still clutching a weapon with no blade. Trauma didn't look noble. It looked fractured, childlike, hollow. Many never came back from that look. And the wounded? There were too many. Field hospitals were just tents or sometimes barns filled with moaning, dying men. You lay on straw, if you were lucky. On mud, if not. Doctors, if present, worked with what they had. Dull blades, no antiseptic, hands that trembled from exhaustion. If they cut off your leg, you bit leather and screamed until your voice gave out. Then you passed out. Or died. One real-life account from a monastery hospital said this: "We prayed for the wounded. Those that did not move, we prayed for their souls. Those that moved, we bound what we could. That was the level of care. You moved, you got help. You didn't? They assumed you were gone. Infection was the second wave of death. A cut, even a small one, could turn black in days. Limbs swelled. Fever cooked you from the inside. Many began to hallucinate. Some wandered off into the woods, never to be seen again. Soldiers tied bits of colored cloth to the infected, so others would know not to share their food or drink. It wasn't cruelty. It was survival." Back in villages, the returning warriors weren't met with parades. They came home ragged, haunted, changed. Children didn't run to them. They hid behind mothers. Wives wept, sometimes with joy, sometimes with despair, because who came back wasn't who left. Men sat by fires and didn't speak for days. Some refused to take off their armor. Others couldn't sleep indoors anymore. One chronicle mentions a knight who spent the rest of his life sleeping in a stable because the house was too quiet, and quiet now frightened him. Medieval society didn't have words like PTSD, but they had ways of describing it. Soul broken, they'd whisper, or not right in the eyes. And those men? They drifted. Some took to drink. Others wandered. A few joined new wars, not for glory, but because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. And all the while, the land buried the scars. Grass grew over blood-soaked fields. Wildflowers bloomed where screams once rose. But sometimes a piece of rusted iron would push through the dirt. A sword tip, a helmet fragment, a reminder. A child would find it. Run to their grandfather. Ask, "What's this?" And the old man would hold that jagged piece of history, stare into the distance and say, "Something you never want to use," because real battles weren't measured in flags or trophies. They were measured in memories, in the weight a man carried long after his sword had been sheathed, in the dreams he didn't speak of, in the way he flinched at thunder. Some stories never leave the battlefield, not because they're too grand to forget, but because they're too heavy to carry home. The truth about medieval battle isn't written in the books. It's etched into bones, hidden under fields that once screamed. And perhaps worst of all, it's passed down quietly through silence. There's a kind of silence only a soldier knows. Not the comforting hush of a quiet morning, but the deafening absence of chaos. When the war ends, when the swords are sheathed, that's when the real reckoning begins. You sit in a corner of your home, with food in your bowl and a roof overhead, and you still can't breathe. Because your lungs only learned how to inhale when surrounded by panic. Some men tried to forget. They drank. Others tried to talk but found no one who understood. A few tried to write it down. Most just buried it deep. And the worst part? No one asked. Villagers were glad the war was over. They didn't want details. They wanted firewood chopped, fences mended, and life to return to normal. But for the fighters, normal had died in the mud. One veteran from a Flemish skirmish said this in his final years. The only thing sharper than the blade was the memory, and memory never rusts. He didn't tell tales of valor. He didn't speak of kills. He only asked for quiet when storms rolled in. You see, that's what no one tells you. The wounds you don't see are the ones that last longest. A shattered arm may heal. But what about the sound of your friend's voice cut off mid-sentence? What about the moment you saw a boy barely 15 fall with a look of confusion, not pain? What about the knowledge that, for a brief moment, you stopped seeing people as people? That's the true cost of battle, not just blood, but empathy. And yet, there's a strange grace in remembering. Because when we speak of the horror, we honor the humanity that endured it. Telling the truth doesn't glorify war, it warns us. It preserves the cost, so maybe, just maybe, it won't be repeated. So if a grandchild ever asks, "What was it really like?" you take a breath, you sit them down, and you say, "It was loud, it was hot, it was confusing, it smelled of iron, and fear. It didn't feel like bravery, it felt like trying not to die. There were no heroes, just survivors, and if you're lucky, you'll never know more than that. And maybe that child will hold that silence with reverence. Maybe they'll carry that truth into a future where memory is enough to prevent repetition. Maybe, that's all we can hope for. Because no song sung about victory is louder than the whisper of a man who lived through it and chose to say, never again. And sometimes that whisper becomes a story told over tea, or a worn book handed down with shaking hands, or the silence between generations, pregnant with meaning, spoken without sound. The lesson remains. If we listen closely, we don't need another battlefield to remember what one costs.